This episode is brought to you by ProMensal.
It is all about attitude. It always has been about attitude. What's wrong with age? What's wrong with looking different in our skin? It's just all about managing your expectations, changing it around, and thinking about sex much differently. If you do that, then you can have great sex after 50.
Welcome to Thriving in Menopause. You know, there are many things we share with our friends, funny stories of hot flushes and embarrassing moments, but what pretty much none of us are doing is talking about what's happening between the sheets. And you know, not feeling horny anymore or suffering from dry or painful sex and other physical changes going on down there are all part of what happens during menopause. In fact, 3 out of 4 women suffer from a pretty crappy sex life during this time. So, it's time to speak up. I'm Andrea Duval, editor of Prevention Magazine, and I'm talking with sexologist Tracy Cox, author of Great Sex Starts at 50. Just a warning, this is a pretty frank talk about sex. Tracy, thanks for joining us today. Now, studies suggest that as many as 2/3 of women going through menopause report problems around sex and desire. But this is one area that most of us don't share with our girlfriends. We might compare hot flushes, but declining orgasms, not really. Tracy, you've been candid about the fact that when you hit menopause, your sex drive completely vanished. So thank you for being so open and honest. And can you please share with us your story?
Yes, I certainly can. I think for me, because of my background as a sexpert, I knew all about this. I knew that with, hormones are what keeps your sex drive going, hormones are what keeps everything elastic and lubricated. I knew that after menopause I would be in for some of this, but I kind of thought that I wouldn't, because I thought to myself, hang on a minute, I've written 16, 17 books about sex. I'm immune to all this. I know all about it. I've always been a big fan of knowledge is power. I've had a very high sex drive the whole of my life. And I kind of thought that it's not going to happen to me, that thing. I went through menopause actually about 48. And then at around 50, I was single at the time, but that doesn't stop me having sex because I'm very fond of my vibrator. And suddenly I just remembered writing about orgasms and then thinking, gosh, I haven't had an orgasm for so long. And what I realized was that spontaneous desire, that thing that just says, right, I really feel like I need an orgasm. I really feel like having sex. I just wasn't feeling that anymore. So it wasn't that I went off sex. I actually just forgot about sex. And for me, that was even more of a, oh my God, what the hell has gone on here? The other thing was when I did start having orgasms with my vibrator, everything felt almost like numb. And it was kind of like, were you still down there? What's going on? I had to turn my vibrator up, and then the orgasm itself felt much less intense than it was before. So I panicked, like before I'd cut my right arm off to have sex, and now all of a sudden I wouldn't lob off a little toe. I was just not interested. And it was completely and utterly not me. I am the person who was always interested in sex, and it frightened me. And of course, so what I did what all good authors do. And I thought, right, if this is happening to me with all my knowledge about sex, then I need to write a book about it, and I need to write a book to find out how to get my mojo back.
Can you take us through the mechanics of how our shifting hormones impact our ability to enjoy sex? Because what you've just said is that it doesn't feel as good as it used to.
It's all to do with estrogen dropping, progesterone, testosterone. It's those three. So, you think that you're in control of your life, but those 3 hormones really do control everything. And so what happens as we age, there is less production of them. So there's reduced hormonal production in the ovaries, which means reduced hormones in the blood. So what happens with that is that if you have low or no estrogen, you've got a decrease in blood circulation as well. So this means that the vaginal walls get thinner, they get less elastic, and your natural lubrication stops. So the drier you are, the more prone you are to infections as well. So it's not just discomfort on sex, which is a big problem. It's you suddenly are prone to thrush. You start suddenly getting, UTIs, urinary tract infections, which of course makes you feel even worse and leads to even more painful penetrative sex. So 2 things are happening. The main thing that women suffer from is just really uncomfortable penetration because the vagina is just dry and not elastic. And then, of course, you tense, which makes sex even more painful. And the other thing is this decrease in hormones means that your desire for sex it drops because you become slower to get aroused. So arousal isn't as quick. So then, just to make it even worse, this sort of decreased blood flow also means there's less sensitivity, which means that some women can find it, it's quite difficult to reach orgasm as well. So you've got this awful sort of all these different things working to completely turn lots of women off sex. Now, what's happening at the same time that women are sort of going through all this is that men, of course, are also having hormone problems. They're suffering from a decrease in testosterone. So they're struggling with erection difficulties, which is a huge, huge big deal for men. They don't talk about it. Like women tend not to chat, like you said, Andrew, about, they chat about the hot flushes, but they don't tend to chat about what's happening to the vaginas. Well, men certainly don't talk about what's happening to their penises, let me tell you. So you get the two people, like she's embarrassed because it's hurting and she feels, there's that whole thing about menopause that, it's not seen as attractive, it's seen as something that we're meant to be ashamed of. He's struggling with erection difficulties, and that's when you get the situation where the couple completely stop having sex because they're both too embarrassed to talk about it. It becomes easier to just avoid it, and that's when you get the sexless marriage happening.
You find that's quite common, Tracy?
It is quite common. And what astonished me most was when I wrote my book, Great Sex Starts After 50, which it can, by the way, it's also a bit depressing, isn't it? There are ways around all of this, is the amount of my friends, very close couples that talk about everything. They've been together forever, they talk about everything, but some of them have managed to take sex off the table and just not have a conversation about it. And it's like, guys, it's fine to not have sex anymore, but you have to acknowledge it. You have to have that conversation. Or else what happens if you don't have that conversation? People then they withdraw affection because they think, oh my God, better not hug too close, better not kiss because it might lead to more. And then we've got to have to face all this. And so they stop affection. And then, if you want to stop sex, that's one thing. You miss out on a whole heap of physical and emotional great things that you get from sex. But if you stop affection, that generally is the death knell for most relationships.
We're going to talk about some of your fantastic strategies for addressing all of this in a minute. But one thing I do want to talk about is already in this podcast series, we've spoken about some of the challenges we face with weight gain comes in our 30s and 40s as our hormones start to shift. And at the same time, we're finding that we're probably less attractive to the opposite sex than we were just walking down the street. It's not the same as when we were 20. So our whole idea of being attractive is being challenged. Now, you've said that feeling desired is the biggest turn on of all. So if you're feeling that you've gained weight and you don't like the way you look and feel, what do you do? How do you learn to feel more comfortable in your own skin?
What I learned from doing the book where I interviewed hundreds of women was it was really interesting that it sort of divided into two camps. There were some women who sort of said, I've put on weight or I look scrawny, or depending on which way your body goes, or, my breasts aren't the way they were. But then there was lots of women who sort of said, and who cares? I don't really mind that. I've redefined sexy. Sexy isn't what it used to be. It's not having pert breasts and long legs. It's all about having nice glowing skin and feeling great about yourself and having confidence. And those women were still having great sex because they felt great about their body. Now, obviously, I didn't ask for pictures of these women, but you could tell that, in fact, they wouldn't have been perfect-looking women in society's eyes. They would have had a bit of weight on. But it was just their attitude. It was like, so what? I think I'm sexy. Who gives it? Who cares whether I've put on a bit of belly fat or not? And then you had this other group of women who were very much, like, I'm not fitting the stereotype of what is sexy anymore. I don't look young. I don't look like I did, and we're really hung up on this. How can any man find me attractive? And surprise, surprise, those women weren't having good sex because they were very much, like spending the whole time having sex, looking down at themselves, thinking, oh my God, my legs don't look good and this doesn't look good. It is all about attitude. It always has been about attitude. I mean, we all know Victoria's Secret supermodels have think they're fat. It is not actually about what you look like and what size you are. It's about your attitude to it. It's about how you think about yourself. So the three, if you really want to boost your body image or your sexual self-esteem, going on a diet is not going to fix it. Actually, exercise does, because exercise increases blood flow, which is fantastic for you, and it increases energy levels. You generally feel good about yourself. It lifts mood, especially if you exercise outside. So that I would recommend. But the two things that do help you feel more sexually connected to your body are things like initiate sex. That makes you feel more powerful and can increase your sexual confidence. Improve your sex skills. The women who thought they were good in bed and felt like they were very comfortable with technique, those were the women who felt like they were sexy and powerful. I mean, they really do. And also the other thing is to have more sex. If you have sex with somebody and they like having sex with you, you can't help but absorb the message that, you know what, my body mustn't be too bad. My body must be quite nice and sexy for this person to respond to it that way. So those are the things that can help you feel sexier about yourself and to move away from this, oh my God, I don't look the way I was before. Who wants to look the way they were before? There was, we need to embrace this thing that what's wrong with age? What's wrong with, looking different in our skin? I mean, look at the people that I admire the most are people like Charlotte Rampling, Helen Mirren. All of these people have not had tons of surgery. They just look fantastic because they are so comfortable in their skin. They're really attractive and they are both still super sexy and they're in their 60s, 70s. It's not all about youth.
So Tracy, for your book, Great Sex Starts at 50, you've canvassed hundreds of women. So I'm fascinated to know, please share with us some of your tips.
Well, as I said, I think the biggest thing that came through with writing this book is all about attitude. You have to change the way you think about sex post-menopause, right? We have to stop defining sex as this young sort of TV sex that we see. And honestly, I'm constantly driven mad when I see scenes on television between, couples who've been together for 20 years and suddenly on a Sunday morning, of course, she's sleeping in fantastic underwear. Come on, when you've been together 30 years, you probably are going to be in fantastic underwear and sort of waking up, looking at each other and then for no reason at all, just suddenly slamming each other up against a wall. That is not what people do in a long-term relationship. And it's really bad to keep thinking that this is what hot sex is. Hot sex, it has to have young people, it has to have people who look a certain way, it has to include intercourse, and it has to be lust-driven. Well, that's not how sex post-menopause is. Sex post-menopause often doesn't include necessarily penetration, because penetration can be incredibly painful. It can include penetration if you do certain things, which I'll talk about, but we need to move away. So what basically happens is if you want to have good sex post-menopause, you have to give foreplay a promotion. So foreplay becomes often the main event. Sex slows down. It's more about oral sex. It's more about using sex toys. It's more about everything that's happening on the outside, i.e. on the clitoris, as opposed to what's happening on the inside, which is where we don't have our orgasm. So for women, it can be better. Now, this all depends, of course, on having a partner who is willing to not let his penis, this is if you're straight, to not let his penis be the star. So if your partner's quite comfortable at moving away from the finale or the big grand event being intercourse, you can actually have really, really good sex. It's much slower, it's more mindful. And like I said, it's all about, I mean, if you think to yourself, okay, it's going to take me longer to have an orgasm, if you're thinking, oh my God, that's going to be awful, oh my God, this is going to be a real hassle, why don't you think this is even better? Because orgasms last a mere seconds. It's all about the journey. So in fact, it means that you can hover in that almost there stage for much longer. So it's just all about managing your expectations, changing it around and thinking about sex much differently. If you do that, then you can have great sex after 50.
I love one of the observations that you make in your book, which is to change our expectations around what desire is and what it feels like, that it's more a flicker, not a roaring fire. The flicker is the flame, you've said, which I thought was a nice expression. But I would like to come back to your point earlier about exercise, because there's a lot of evidence around that actually increasing your ability to actually feel pleasure as well.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm not a medical person, so I don't probably know. But I'm sure, I mean, they did some bizarre experiment where they had all these women on exercise bikes and then made them have orgasms, which I thought was a bit strange, not your average thing. But and they found that the women who had just exercised on the exercise bikes did have stronger orgasms. So there is definitely something in that. But I think also it's all about, you can't just say, right, you can't separate things. It's all about a whole lifestyle. I mean, that's the other thing, is that women who hit midlife and go through menopause often are having their lifestyle habits catch up with them as well. I'm sure other people have talked about this. This is when, if you've drunk too much alcohol in your life, if you smoke too much, if you haven't exercised, if you've eaten badly, it is all catching up with you. And these things also impact on it. It's not just menopause. So we need to sort of exercise, definitely. You need to live well. You need to make sure that you're happy. You need to, the other thing is to physically prepare for sex. I mean, again, it's all about managing expectations. In the old days, when you're young, your body is, can be primed and ready for sex in minutes, seconds sometimes. When you're older, you need to plan a little bit more. People don't like that either, because we all have this hang up that sex is meant to be spontaneous. Well, anticipation is just as good as spontaneity. So when you're older, he needs time to think about how to get his erection, whether it means he's going to take a Viagra or not worry about it, or needs more stimulation. Most women over 50 wouldn't dream of having penetrative sex without lube. So you kind of need to rethink everything. But I think if you do that, then, it is you just have to rethink everything and have the right attitude and put a few things into place. And then sex can be just as good. Another two very practical things which really did change the sex life of a lot of people that I know well enough for them to report back to me was to change the way your partner thrusts. If you do want to have penetration, what you do is, if sex is a bit painful, is you keep your pelvises close and you grind in a circular motion rather than pulling out and going back in and using that traditional style of thrusting, which can hurt and be very painful. If you use this other style, it can mean that intercourse, which might have been off the table and not possible, it can make it possible again. There's another thing that you can do, which is wear a buffer, which is kind of like a thick, squidgy ring that he wears on the base of his penis that stops him penetrating too far. And that could be a game changer if sex is painful for you as well.
Hey, Tracy, one thing that I think we need to talk about here too that's super important is stress, because all of this, as we keep saying during these podcasts, all of these changes are happening at a time in life when you are absolutely sandwiched, when you are juggling, often raising a family, often, you're now in a position of some responsibility at work. You might have aging parents. You've got so many commitments and pressures on you. Usually you're putting yourself last in this chain. So stress is like cyanide for the libido, really. And I'm interested in your observation that with women, desire and arousal don't automatically flow in the same way they do for men, and that for many women, desire for sex comes after arousal. So I think it comes back to the point you were making earlier about make time for sex. And just that sort of tap on the shoulder on a Sunday morning, how about it now, is not going to be quite the same as kind of going, I'm going to clear some time for this. And as you're saying, be patient.
Yes. And I think also the point about stress, and sex is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be a pleasure. And I think if you add it on the end or even the beginning of a big long to-do list, and you are really, really battling against it, if you've got the aging parents, you're in the middle of a pandemic, for God's sake, sometimes you are too stressed to have sex, and you're better off just having a conversation with your partner and saying, you know what, I know sex is a stress reliever, but at the moment I'm too stressed to even think about it. Certainly I've been in that place and just said, look, it's just not going to happen for a while because of where I'm at in my life. And if you speak to your partner and say, look, I think we need to take sex off, stop having sex at the moment, just take the pressure off ourselves. It works. It's when you do that and don't tell your partner that you're just doing it temporarily that it causes problems. So I would say if you're that stressed, stop having sex. Keep masturbating, because that tends to be much less stress-free, and that can help you keep your libido high and give you the stress release that an orgasm brings without that sort of partner stress that comes with partner sex. But certainly, yes, as you get older, that sort of mad desire that, oh my God, if I don't have sex, I'm going to cut my arms off, it goes, and that's all to do with hormones. So don't think that suddenly you have a low libido. It's got nothing to do with libido. It's to do with hormones. You can have just as good orgasms. You can bring, that desire back, but you have to, like you said, you've got to work at it. So what you can go, like men still, even with the testosterone dribbling through the floor, I still seem to have that ability to sort of become spontaneously aroused. They'll look at something and then think, right, I want to have sex, and then go and seek it. With women, often you can think, that's the last thing I feel like. I've got no desire whatsoever. But once they start being stimulated, all of a sudden arousal happens then, and then they're like, actually, I'm quite enjoying this, and they'll go on to have an orgasm. Now, this isn't just about women past a certain age. This happens with all women. Lots of women have responsive desire, it's called, where you feel like sex after being stimulated rather than spontaneous desire, which is when you look at something or just spontaneously feel like sex. And in fact, a brilliant, brilliant book, which you should read if you're interested in this, is called Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski, and she explains this incredibly well, that sex is for women is so complicated. It's all to do with triggers and all this sort of stuff. So this is good news for women. So it means that if you're looking at your partner and thinking, oh my God, what's wrong with me? I just don't want to have sex with you anymore. That's okay, because that's just how your body is reacting. So if you actually set up the right environment for sex, maybe have a bath, maybe work out what does it for you, read some erotic books, get your partner lots of kissing, lots of stroking, then you will feel like sex if you sort of give yourself permission and make sure, give yourself a chance to let yourself get aroused by your partner. Now, this, of course, if it's going to work well, means that you have to have a partner who, if you don't get aroused and actually give it the old college try to get stimulated. But if you aren't, then, you have to have some sort of agreement that you're not going to be forced into having sex if you don't want to. Maybe you can pleasure them. It's this whole shifting away from what I would call a young person's view of sex, as opposed to a real view of what happens when our bodies get older. Not just bodies get older, but when we are with somebody for a long time. They're very similar, like long-term desire and short-term desire are two different beasts.
And I suppose when we're talking about relationships, it's not always the long-term relationships, that there are a lot of women at this age who are entering new relationships as well, which brings a whole different load of pressures and perhaps a reluctance to speak really candidly in the way that you might with someone you might have known for 20 years. Do you have any particular advice in that situation?
Actually, do you know what? It's normally the opposite. Normally we're happier talking about all those deep, dark sex secrets or things that we'd like to do that are a bit dodgy to somebody who we've just met than we are the partner who's just taken out the bins and picked Susie up from school and all that sort of stuff. It's actually quite the opposite. So this is the other thing that was massively interesting in the book, is that there was another group of women who'd actually got to postmenopause and just thought, you know what? I'm over the relationship I'm in. I'm actually, this is me now. I've done my bit bringing up the kids. This is my time. Leave a relationship that's been stale probably for a very long time and get out there and actually find a new relationship and have this whole new lease of life. I mean, new relationships are, of course, infinitely more exciting at the start than the old relationship that you've been in. And so they kind of discover this like midlife wanderlust. And because, like I said, women tend to go one of two ways. They either become less confident or they become more confident and less concerned about what people think, less concerned about pleasing men. Because I think in our 20s, most women are quite people-pleasing in bed. And so they can then go on to have this amazing sex life, which, they sort of reinvent themselves and become very body confident no matter what they look like. So in some ways, I think women post-50 suddenly become single, often end up having a ball and end up with lots of younger men.
Well, you've given us some great positive messages. So finally, Tracy, what's one thing that you really want to tell women about this fundamental change to our bodies and desires that we haven't touched on so far?
I think one big thing which needs to be said is it really is a case of use it or lose it. When we kind of talk about sex post-menopause, you have to keep having sex, not only to keep your genitals healthy, because that is what will keep your genitals healthy, but once we keep having sex, it just keeps everything running well. It's a bit like, if you're going to stop running for the bus, you're not going to be able to run for a bus anymore. You have to keep having sex in order to really enjoy sex as you get older. And so the next question is usually, well, how often do I have to have it? I think find your own normal. It could be once a month. It could be once every 2 months. It might be once a week. So that question you need to solve for yourself. But to keep the health benefits going and to keep the genitals in good shape, you probably need to have some type of sex. It could include an orgasm on your own, by the way, about once a fortnight. So if you could just aim for that twice a week, some kind of sexual encounter between the two of you, you will be in pretty good shape.
Oh, Tracy, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing with us an area where we don't talk to our girlfriends. So thank goodness there are women like you who are prepared to give us such really practical, no-holds advice. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please come and subscribe and leave a review. and tell your friends. This episode was produced by Lisa Gebelagen, and if you'd like to hear more from Prevention Magazine, come and have a look at preventionaus.com.au, that's preventionaus.com.au. See you next time.